So over the past 2 decades, China's transformed the macro environment for the global mining industry. And if ever I make a statement you disagree, that will make for fantastic conversation. So let me make my statement and then we get to you agreeing or not. So you were a very early mover in recognizing that seismic shift, becoming a director and professor of global leadership at the prestigious Tsinghua University, and then seeking to develop deep partnerships there. You were also recently part of a high-level visit of US business leaders to meet with President Xi in Beijing. So 2 questions, if I may, John, related to China. What lessons do you think the Western-based miners could learn from the way the Chinese have expanded their global investment and organic capability in the natural resources industry? And is it good or bad?
Okay, so bear with me, I'm going to give you a very long answer. First thing I want to say is I'm extremely happy to be here. I've never been to an Indaba conference before. My passion for the last more than 2 decades has been China, the rise of China, the relationship of that to the world, in particular to the United States. And you can make a strong case that Africa is kind of ground zero for that US-China tension. The second thing I want to say is when one talks about China, it's very easy to get carried away and to get hyperbolic. So I'm going to try to resist that, but I'm sure I will not be entirely successful. Third thing I want to say is because there's so little time, almost inevitably I'm going to have to speak more authoritatively and run over various qualifications which are certainly there. And so don't think I don't know that they're there, but I'm trying just to be simple and clear. Fourth thing I want to say is, as an American, when you get invited to participate in a fireside chat, of course you think of Franklin Roosevelt. And my first degree was in American political history, specifically the Great Depression. So I couldn't help but think about Roosevelt, and I want to go through this a little bit because I think it's relevant. So Roosevelt took office in March of 1933, and 8 days later he gave his first fireside chat. And the first fireside chat was essentially on the banking crisis. And Roosevelt had said to his staff he wanted a way to communicate directly with the American people, and he wanted to do it as though he were sitting with a few friends around the fireside. And so that very first week that he was president, the second or third day, he shut down all the banks in the country because they were basically, too many were going under, there were runs on the banks, loss of confidence, etc. And then having shut them down, he then enacted legislation with the Congress very quickly to allow for federal deposit insurance to try to calm down the fears of depositors. So on day 8, he gives his first fireside chat. It's on a Sunday evening at 10 p.m. 60 million people listened to him at a time when the population of the country was 120 million. Presumably 25% of them were below the age of 18, so they're presumably not listening. So 60 million people. He very intentionally used simple, plain language in trying to describe complicated concepts to ordinary people. And in fact, later on, when academics went back and looked, they found that 80% of his words were among the most common words in the English language. And so Roosevelt goes on to this first fireside chat. He gives it. The next day, they start to reopen the banks. Half the money that had fled comes back in. The stock market has its best day in history up until that point. I go through this long story because I think a theme we're eventually going to get to is the mining industry and mining companies and how they do or do not engage with the world as a whole and with people as a whole. And then one final comment, then I'll get to your question. you haven't read it, I would recommend it to you. There's a book that came out 5 or 6 years ago called New Power. And essentially, it's a book that contrasts what they call old power with new power. And simplistically, they say old power is essentially operates like a currency. I have it, and I dole it out as I see fit. And new power essentially is the managing or directing of currents to a goal. You could simplistically, and people would object to this, but I think this is probably right, you could simplistically see Trump as kind of a new power politician. I mean, he's taking the energy that's out there and he's directing it. And he's got a very, very personal relationship with his followers. And you can see Biden as old power. Okay, so that's also very relevant because it also gets to the question of business model for the mining industry. Now on China. So again, I want to take this up to 100,000 feet for context first. So as you can imagine, talking about China in the United States is a, what's the word I'm looking for? It's not good for your health. It's a very, very toxic topic. You'll be aware of the fact that in Washington, among the elites, it's probably the only thing they all agree on, that China is either a, pick your choice, competitor, threat, enemy, opponent. And from time to time, I'm asked to speak to American audiences on China, and so it's always a dilemma for me. I'm thinking to myself, okay, wait a minute, you're only going to get in trouble. So where do you start? So I started thinking to myself, well, maybe an easier way to deal with the question is to look into the future. And that way take some of the emotion out of the present day. But soon enough that it's real. So I started focusing on mid-century, the year 2050. And I did a little bit of research, and I learned that the best estimates are there'll be something like 10 billion people in the year 2050, 10 billion in the world. Today there are roughly 8 billion. And those 2 billion incremental people are going to come primarily from 9 countries. And those 9 countries are India, Pakistan, the DRC,
Indonesia, probably.
Uganda, Ethiopia, Tanzania, Indonesia, the United States. So essentially, again, here I'm painting with a broad brush, so forgive me, but essentially you're adding 2 billion primarily poor people, primarily in Africa and parts of Central Asia. And at the same time, the concentration of wealth. The US and China today are something like, round numbers, 40% of global GDP. By 2050, no one knows, of course, but it'll be north of 50%. Could be as high as 60%. So you get a higher concentration of wealth and many, many poor people. And that disparity, we know what that looks like because we're living it today. It's not a very good look. And any topic you want to choose, whether it's climate change, or it's pandemics, or it's terrorism, or pick whatever topic it is, any topic you choose, the dynamics around that topic get worse in the world that I'm describing in 2050. So then I rhetorically say to my American audience, so raise your hand, those of you who think it's a good idea that the world's wealthiest, most powerful countries, whether that's the top 10 or the top 5 or the top 2, who thinks it's a good idea in the world I just described that the top 2 countries should be spending most of their time fighting with each other? That can't make any sense in any rational universe. So I start with that context because when I took on the job as chairman of Barrick, I literally went to the senior leaders in China and said, since I left Goldman Sachs a decade ago, I essentially haven't taken one penny from one person for one thing. Because when I was teaching at Tsinghua University and also advising Chinese officials, I didn't want there to be any doubt in their minds as to what I was doing and why I was doing it. I'm not doing it to make money. So when I was asked to take on the chairmanship of Barrick by Peter Monk, who was its founder, who was getting old and wasn't very healthy, and the company wasn't very healthy. I essentially wanted to help him as a personal favor. I knew absolutely nothing about mining. But I went to the senior Chinese leadership and I said, listen, I've been asked to do this. I'm inclined to do it, to be helpful to a friend, but I'm not going to do it unless you want me to do it. Because the very first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to try to create partnerships with leading Chinese gold companies. And I realized for that to happen, you have to think it's a good idea, or else it's not going to happen. So if you don't want that to happen, tell me now, I'm not going to take the job. But if you want it to happen, then tell me that. They said, no, by all means take the job. So when I took the job, number one priority in my mind was how to create partnerships with certain leading Chinese companies. And why did I do that? Well, I did that for a lot of different reasons, but the two most prominent ones were, from Barrick's point of view, I saw it as financial and political risk mitigation. Because I promise you, if you go talk to the head of a government, pick your country, and you go in there, you're the chairman of one reasonably good-sized Canadian public company, for a conversation, is a certain kind of conversation. You go into that same meeting, and your partner is China. It's a different kind of conversation. So that's why I did it. Now, the other reason I did it was because my experience in other industries, and here again I'm painting with a broad brush, so I realize there are many exceptions to what I'm about to say, but it's broadly true. In general, the Chinese companies are hungrier, more tolerant of failure, much faster. And, maybe most important, they're looking at the long-term success. So I wanted some of that DNA brought into Barrick. And in some of my other roles in life, as an example, I'm the lead director of the Ford Motor Company. And I've said to Bill Ford and to Jim Farley, the CEO, the single most important reason for Ford to be in China is not because the Chinese automotive market is larger than both the American and European markets combined, although that's an important reason. The most important reason is because you see the future faster. The rate of innovation, the speed at which the Chinese automotive industry is moving is much, much faster than the Western competition. So if you accept the fact that if you've got the largest market in the world and you're the leader in that market, the likelihood is sooner or later you're going to be a leader in the world. And if that's the case, then Ford ought to understand how to compete against that right now and start innovating at the same speed. And the same thing applies in the mining industry.
Thank you very much. We will probably touch more on China, but I want to move to when you became the chairman of Barrick Gold in 2014. You took a radical approach to recruiting executives from outside of the industry. You wanted some of the Chinese DNA, but you actually made significant changes, seeking fresh perspectives to help drive rapid change within the business. The question I want to put to you is, what is your view on the current nature of executive leadership across the industry in terms of being fit for purpose? So today is different. It's 10 years later and different challenges, but share your leadership, your perspective on today's industry leadership.
You know, there's sort of two bookends to that. At one end of the spectrum, when you think through the importance to the world of minerals and how there's essentially nothing in the world that gets done of any consequence that doesn't somehow involve a mineral. You think about the consequence of that, and then you think of the understanding or the ignorance of that on the part of the vast majority of the world. I think there's nothing like it. There's no other industry like it. I was looking just yesterday at the Edelman trust barometer survey they do every year. And you look at when they assess industries. So I was looking at it. You realize the mining industry isn't even on there. It's sort of subsumed into energy. And given the consequence of mining, it's quite breathtaking how ignorant the world is of mining. So that's at one. So the reason I mention this, though, is because, to your point, therefore, in my opinion, the leadership you need to tackle that issue, let alone all the operational issues and all the issues we all know about to be a successful mining company, the quality of the leadership has got to be high, high, high. And if that's the requirement, and you're grading what exists against what's needed, there's an enormous gap. And one of the reasons that I did what you described, which is go outside the industry, was because my experience tells me all industries are incredibly insular. And the mining industry maybe is certainly if it's not the worst, it's certainly down at that end of the spectrum. And when I say the industry, I'm talking not just about the people in the industry, but also the people who invest in the industry, the people who analyze the industry. It's a very small little world, incredibly small. In fact, I've never quite seen anything quite like it. And every industry has that arrogance. That, if you didn't come up my way, you don't count. I remember Alan Mulally, when he took over as the CEO of Ford. Bill Ford, the way that he introduced him to the top 1,000 people in the company, they had an event where the 1,000 people are in a big auditorium, and out behind a curtain comes Bill Ford with Alan Mulally, and everyone in the audience is saying, "Who the hell is this guy?" They've never seen him before. And Bill introduces him, and then first question out of the audience was more or less, "What do you know about the automotive industry?" And so Alan says, "I'm glad you asked that question, because the average automobile has 10,000 parts. The average aircraft has 4 million parts, and the plane's got to fly. So how difficult can this be?" And he shut down that sort of attitude right away. So I'm a believer, essentially, to simplify it, I'm a believer in outstanding people, period. Outstanding people are so rare. My basic attitude is you find one, you grab him or her as fast as you can, put them in a role, and they'll figure it out. Now, of course, there are outstanding people in all industries. But since they're so rare, whatever the number is, whatever the percentage is in the mining industry, if I can add to that, I'm going to add to it. And in general, I have found that when you have a sort of a diversity of attitude, diversity of thinking, diversity of energy level, diversity of leadership styles, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, when you put all that together, you get a better result.
And there I was thinking you bought Randgold for the assets. Clearly it was for Bristow, eh?
It was, actually.
A lot of people here know Bristow, but they're all too young to have had the privilege to know Peter Monk. So I'm old enough to have been in the gold industry when he was Mr. Barrick, all on his own. So it was quite interesting. So, Barrick sort of sold assets in Africa, and then when you became the chairman of Barrick, you actually stepped in. And the public version, which is the only one I've read, is that you personally actually went to Tanzania. You met with the Magufuli government behind closed doors, many hours. You came out, you've done a deal, which you then seem to tell Acacia and others about. The nicely written up version of you going in there and coming out with a deal is interesting. But I'm more interested in what do you think was the key to the success in that situation? What does that say about the future nature of mining business partnerships? I'm coming back to the partnership with governments, if you don't mind, John.
Okay, so the first thing I want to say is that every person in this room conceptually understands exactly what's necessary. So in my opinion, I used to say when I was working at Goldman Sachs to the incoming people, first-year people, it's not that Goldman Sachs has got some blinding insight that Morgan Stanley doesn't have. everybody more or less has got these insights. The difference is high-quality execution. If we can execute 51% of the time better than the competition, we're going to be the leader. So it's not the concepts that are not understood. It's the way they're executed. So in this example you're giving, and just to make it even more, a little slightly more colorful, Barrick had, before I arrived, had decided essentially to get out of Africa. And so they decided, I wasn't there at the time, but they decided, okay, we're going to create a subsidiary. We're going to put all our African assets in that subsidiary. We're going to list it in London. We're going to call it by a different name. We're going to get management from outside Barrick, which will be presumably more entrepreneurial and more used to being successful in Africa, and let it run. And we'll just have a big stake in it, and let the stake appreciate in value. In fact, what happened was they listed it. They called it African Barrick. They put a Barrick person in to run it. And surprise, surprise, it was not successful. So then in round two, they said, okay, let's change the name, bring in management, which they did. So they changed it to Acacia. They brought in management. More successful, but not as successful as it needed to be. And then found itself in a position where it had such bad relations with the government that literally the management, which was based in London, was fearful of going to Tanzania. So I'm just watching this from afar, and I'm getting very impatient that, as far as I can tell, nothing good is happening. So finally, I do what I believe, which is I believe that when you show up in a place, when you sit down and you talk to people, 100% of the time you're going to learn a lot. And some percentage of the time, some good things are going to happen. So I said, okay, I'm going to go to Tanzania myself, find out what's going on here. So I flew to Tanzania, booked myself in a hotel, started talking to people inside Acacia, outside Acacia. And then I received a message that President Magufuli wanted to see me. So I thought that was a good thing. So I met with him one-on-one. And look, I knew from my experience that when you're meeting somebody for the first time, there's zero chance that they will or should trust you. So all you can hope to do is say things and then act on those things that and start to build a sort of a track record. So I sat down with him. I said, listen, President Magufuli, thank you very much for seeing me. Let me tell you the way I think about life in general when you're partnering with somebody. First of all, I want to do what you want me to do. If you want me and Barrick to leave, we're going to leave. If you want me and Barrick to stay, we'll stay. But if we stay, we're only going to stay as genuine partners. For me, the word partner, by definition, starts at 50-50. Now, you may make the case that you deserve 60 and I deserve 40, or vice versa, but that's my starting point. To me, it's the obvious starting point. So my proposition to you is, if you want us to stay, we stay on the basis of 50-50. Or if you want us to go, we'll go. And that then led to an extended conversation over many hours, to your point. And eventually, he and I had a kind of meeting of the minds. And by the way, to your point, since Barrick we were a 62% shareholder in Acacia, but we weren't the board of directors. So I'm in no position to agree anything other than to agree what I think will work and then go back to Acacia and say, okay, the president of the country said that he's in agreement with this, so you guys can decide yes or no. And I explained that to the president. So in any event, I think simplistically, I wasn't the old, I was the new. That gave me a big leg up, and then the personal chemistry was good, and so it led to an agreement. Now, I want to keep going on this just for a second, though, because all the way back to 1982, when I came to London for Goldman Sachs, as strange as it seems, back then, Goldman Sachs had one office outside the United States, and it was in London, and it had 50 people. and 25 of those people were back office people, and 20 were selling U.S. equities to British institutions, and 5 called themselves bankers. One person for each of 5 European countries, only one of whom spoke the language of the country that he was assigned to. And then I arrive, and make a long story short, I stay. And so I spend more than 90% of my career outside the United States, first in Europe and then in Asia. But in Europe, because we were building the business, and because Goldman Sachs only operates at the sort of larger, more consequential end of the spectrum in investment banking, our number one quality had to be, we need to figure out a way to get the industrial leaders and the government leaders and the civic leaders in any given country or market to be prepared to trust us, or we're going to have nothing. That has to be our number one quality. So after having done that for 20 years, and then doing it in China, if you do something long enough, you get pretty good at it. And so my point is this, that and China is the most extreme example of this. Personal trust is, in a sense, the whole thing. And if you can't build the personal trust, you're not going to have any success. And to build personal trust, I'll finish this one story to illustrate something. It's got to be genuine trust. So when I first became chairman of Goldman Sachs Asia, I decided to run it as a triumvirate with 2 people working for me as sort of co-CEOs, and I was the chairman, and the 3 of us would sort of form a triumvirate to lead the group as a whole. But I decided that I was personally going to take responsibility for China. This is back in the mid-1990s, a long time ago. And I took a flight from London to Shanghai. And there was a young Chinese, obviously banker, in the first-class cabin with me. And I could see this guy, and he eventually comes over to say hello. And it turns out he works for Morgan Stanley. He and I then talk for the next 10 hours. By the time we land, I've hired him. And he tells me in this long conversation, Morgan Stanley had a joint venture with the Chinese Construction Bank. So the Chinese Construction Bank had the largest stake, Morgan Stanley had a small stake. So in addition to Morgan Stanley as its own entity, it had this joint venture in China. It was the only one. And so this individual tells me that he believes that after the handover of Hong Kong, that the Chinese vice premier, later premier, wants to show the world that China can run one country, 2 systems, so they're going to list a Chinese state-owned enterprise on the Hong Kong market right after the handover. And this person says to me, and we believe it's going to be a mobile telephone company that they're going to create out of thin air from the southern 3 provinces. Well, I'd been extremely involved 10 years earlier with the creation of Vodafone. So this is something I knew a lot about. So I say to this young guy I've just met, I need you to get me a meeting with the most senior Chinese person at the Morgan Stanley joint venture, because I've looked at the masthead and I've noticed the CEO is a Morgan Stanley person from New York, and the number 2 person's the Chinese guy from the Chinese Construction Bank. And I've seen that many, many times before. I guarantee you that number 2 guy's not happy. I want to meet him. So the meeting was arranged. I met with this person at 11 o'clock at night. I'd never met him before. I sit down, I say, listen, obviously, by the way, I speak no Chinese, he speaks no English. So I have a translator. So I say to the translator, listen, obviously you're meeting me for the first time. You have no reason to trust me. I understand that. So all I ask you to do, listen to what I say, watch what I do, and you'll see that I'm trustworthy and reliable. And over time, I want to build a relationship with you. And my understanding is that the government's thinking of listing the state-owned enterprise, the mobile telephone company. I know I'm probably one of the most knowledgeable people in the world about that particular topic. I happen to be very, very senior. I'm here. What I'd love to do with you is do this with you. And here's the real story. The real story is you call yourself an investment banker. But the truth is, you don't know the first thing about investment banking. That's okay. I know a lot about it. So here's my proposition. I will teach you investment banking. I'll make you look like a genius in front of your premier on this particular topic, because I know it cold. And all I want from you is to teach me China. I don't need any credit. I don't need anything. And I've got such resources all over the world at my disposal. I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll put them at your disposal. If you ask me for, you need a resource, I'll give it to you. If you need a resource and I think it's a bad idea, I'm going to explain to you why it's a bad idea, but I'm still going to give it to you if you want it. So I just want you to think about this. So he says to me, I don't need to think about this. I want to do this. I say, great. So he and I, sure enough, he gets us a meeting with the premier. This is, a few months later. By the time we have the meeting, I've got him completely schooled. He knows the subject matter cold. We go into the meeting. It's obvious from the standpoint of the Chinese premier. We know the subject cold. And from there on, for about the next year, we meet quietly and privately with the most senior leadership on this topic, in the end, to execute this transaction. Now, the reason I'm telling you the story is because the trust, or the beginning parts of trust that were built in that initial meeting, here I am, whatever it is, 30 years later. That individual I met that night, I'm still extremely close to him. Every time I'm in China, I see him. And naturally, because he knows 100 times more than I'll ever know, he's an incredibly efficient source for me to get insight every single time I come to China. And that's what I've been doing for the last 20 plus years. And so the issue of, everyone in this room knows, when you're dealing with a sovereign entity, whether it's Tanzania or any other country, guess what? They own the asset. It's their asset. It's not going anywhere. They're bigger than you are. They're more powerful than you are. They write the rules. They can change the rules. If that partner's not happy, you got a big problem. So overwhelmingly, building that relationship with the sovereign entity, and typically with the province and the community and the workers, all of that, absolutely essential. And everyone in this room knows it. But the truth is, most mining companies don't do it very well. That's the reality.
John, if I change direction a little bit, when I read about you and Barrick, I was very interested in your very critical comments around Equinox's, one of the worst acquisitions made ever by Barrick, or one of the top ones.
No, made ever by any mining company.
Yeah, you were quite bold. Can we bring it a bit more to your time at Barrick? Are you in a position where you can reflect and say, in my time at Barrick, we also made some mistakes, and the insights to that? It's not confession.
Have you got a couple hours?
Just give us the highlights of one or two of your mistakes.
No, we've made many, many mistakes. In the very early days, we were just surviving. We had $13.5 billion of debt. We needed to sell things as fast as we could to get the debt down. And then to your point, you may remember, or I'll remind you, that when I became the chairman, I got rid of the CEO role. And I decided I wanted to run Barrick as a partnership in the way Goldman Sachs ran, so that the top half dozen, 8, 10 people would meet collectively every week. We discuss every important topic and reach a consensus and then go. And also was a way for me to learn the business. But I also knew, sooner or later, I wanted to merge Barrick with a company that had, it's conceptual at the point, the best CEO in the business. And so when we did that, I wanted the CEO role to be open, so you just move, so you don't have those social issues that you have around merging companies. And so that was the concept. And then I learned early on that Bristow had a very, very strong reputation, best guy in the industry. So he and I started to get to know each other. And we spent really 3 years talking to put the company together. And on the Barrick side, having the board that I inherited, having made an intentional decision to get out of Africa, you can imagine when I first said, no, we're going to merge with this African company, that wasn't their first choice. And that's all worked out, that whole concept worked out very well. Mistakes we've made. The number one I would highlight is, this does get to the way I think. And to go back to Peter Monk and Equinox. Financial people, particularly financial entrepreneurs like Peter Monk, they sort of think, the only thing I need to do is just get the big things right. If I get the big things right, everything else will kind of take care of itself. So buying Equinox, I wasn't there, but I can imagine. Peter, for whatever set of reasons, decided, this is something I'm going to do, come hell or high water, period. And if I quote unquote overpay for it, it doesn't matter. Barrick has been, in my view, very slow to say to themselves, the most important thing when you're buying companies in the mining industry, with the cycles that we have, when the cycle's on the down and the share prices are very low, and it's a company, obviously, you think you should buy, and it's a good company, just buy it. Don't spend a lot of time arguing around, do I pay $6 or $8? Just buy it. And we've not done that. We have insisted on kind of getting into the weeds. And that's been a mistake.
I suppose that is where I could then just explore with you whether boards of publicly listed mining companies have become too risk averse. And if you agree with that statement, what would remedy this? Do you agree with the statement?
Well, yes. I mean, what I would say is that, going back to what I was saying a minute ago, when one recognizes how vital minerals are to the world, and you say to yourself, we want to be a leader in the industry that takes those minerals and does something constructive with them, then, and what I said earlier about the Chinese being faster, more tolerant of failure, et cetera, I think the mining industry, and for reasons I understand, it's a little bit like PTSD. You know, they go through these ups and downs. They have a bad series of acquisitions. They get killed by the market, deservedly so, and then they get gun shy. So yes, I think that the industry as a whole, again, painting with a broad brush, is too conservative, too short-term, lacking confidence in investing in its own business. And how you remedy that, I don't know. There's no easy answer. I think the easiest answer is you remedy it with better leadership. But that's not easy to find. But I think that's the real answer.
So this is one of those questions where you've touched on the topic, and the question is still there in front of me. So I'm going to put it to you with a slight sort of slant. So the question from the audience is, what leadership qualities do you think are lacking in modern leadership of the mining sector? So I'm going to ask you, can you sort of give us the 1, 2, 3 key things that you think is lacking? And this is now not a Barrick question, this is industry-wise.
Lacking in leaders in the industry. I think I've touched on this already. I think that, it's hard to give an answer that's compelling because, as I said before, I think most of them are doing more or less the right thing, more or less predictably, more or less at a reasonable standard. But the issue is that's not good enough. It's both for macro purposes, i.e. for the good of the world, and for purposes of just running a business well and getting good returns. You've got to execute at a very, very high level. And that's simply not happening. So when you ask why is that? What's at the root of that? There are 27 different answers to that question. But I think that you know it when you see it. When you see a leader who is execution obsessed, and to go back to my point about new power, and is what I'll call a modern leader, that is to say, directing the current of all the people that are a part of their world, that's the person you want. And those people are right now few and far between, and they're generally speaking not in the mining industry.
Yeah, I must say, I hear you so clearly about this execution, passion, setting you apart, because they're engineers and geologists and financial guys, bankers and lawyers in the industry, and so it can never be that specific technical skill. It's the on top of. The gold industry faces its own particular challenges. You don't know what to make with the money you make out of the high gold price. Sorry, my sarcasm as an old gold miner. When I left and the gold was at 500, why did I leave? So, I mean, gold focus, you are very happy to diversify into copper. That's something that happened in your time. Are you... So give us the gold-copper combination story. Are you still happy to be in gold? Do you wish you were bigger in copper? Just give us a Barrick take on that combination. Now, they come together in ore bodies sometimes.
Yeah,
there's a logic.
Yeah, I was going to say, in the Western Hemisphere in particular, they're together in ore bodies. So Barrick we want to be the best in the world at what we do. And we're a gold, copper, gold company. That'll continue to be the case for certainly during my tenure. And I say to Bristow, my kind of fantasy or my ideal is to build a company which is in a category of one. And given what I was saying a minute ago about China, about leadership in the industry generally, if you truly could build a highly distinctive leadership team, then I would invest with them all day long in any number of minerals that have got similar characteristics. Because I think that the generic set of skills you need to be very, very good or to be exceptional, why not make it available to as broad an audience as possible? We'd be better off than what we have at the moment.
So, pre your time at Barrick, I would say Barrick was in a category of one through size. They were so aggressively hedged that they actually owned and created that space as an instrument, the way they went about that. But size was a critical part of it. I mean, is it still, do you still have to be the biggest? I know your hostile bid for Newmont sat in the category. Just give us the size conversation, because so many evil things happen in mining because of the CEOs need to be the biggest.
Well, certainly in gold, you do not have to be the biggest. You've got to be the best. One of the things about mining that's kind of interesting is that all the economic activity happens on the ground in a specific place with a specific set of people. And that's it. And so whether you're sitting in London, Toronto, wherever you're sitting, you're not much good sitting up there when the activity's down here. And each one of these is its own world. So the reality is, of course, if you're Mark Bristow and you've been in the industry your entire life and you've seen everything and done everything, of course you're very valuable, as he does. He goes mine to mine to mine to mine to mine all year long. That's extremely valuable. No question. It reminds me a little bit of Margaret Thatcher. They used to say when her ministers came to brief her, they were terrified because she knew more about the subject matter than they did. Same thing, Bristow goes to a mine. You don't want to be the guy briefing unless you really know what you're talking about. So there's that. That's a big benefit. But our business model, which I think is every mining company's business model, but we try to do it better than the competition. And I'd say I think our business, the DRC, is a good example. In the DRC, as you know, we're in northeastern DRC, which is a pretty dangerous neighborhood. We've created from absolutely nothing an asset or a business, which in turn has created a kind of 500,000 person, vibrant, thriving, small city, large town, in which the people have got good education, good housing, good health care, decent food, good skills, et cetera, et cetera. Our goal is to have that business 100% run by Congolese for all kinds of obvious reasons. And every mining company in the world says the same thing, and most of them don't do it. Most of them, the leadership is not from the country in which the mine is located, and it doesn't make any sense. So my point is, going back to your question about scale, no, so if you're running the mine in the DRC, the reality is what we're doing in Nevada, generally speaking, is not much relevance to you. There's a little bit of cross-fertilization, and Bristow does what he does, which is great. But the truth is, for the thousands of people in that mine, what we're doing in Nevada doesn't make a damn bit of difference.
Yeah. And your definition, I've lost my phone and the question. Your definition of a top-tier company, obviously gold specific, I personally relate to and like 500,000 ounces of production, 10 years of life, sort of bottom half of the cost quartile. I grew up in an industry where we were all in the bottom quartile. It was very crowded. Every CEO stood up and claimed to be in the bottom quartile, and I always wondered how gullible are investors. But I mean, that obviously is a long life, decent size, profitable mine through the cycle, and that must enable a management team at the top, but also on the mine, to make longer term investment decisions.
Yeah.
To mine through the cycle, to invest through the cycle.
We have a very simple strategy, which is tier one mines, which by definition are economically the most attractive. And in theory, what ought to happen is when the gold price is low or the copper price is low, you make money and you're okay. But when it's high, you have a kind of windfall every so often. But to get that windfall, you've got to be operationally very efficient and make sure you actually do get the windfall.
Yeah. And the windfalls are so interesting because that's when partnerships with governments gets tested. Now, windfalls and windfall taxes is almost flip sides of the same sort of concept. Are you finding that your partnerships, and we're having an African conversation, do you think your partnerships withstand that in the good times when you do print money? Are you fair to your partners?
Yeah, my feeling is that it's impossible to overstate the extent to which you need to build partnerships of trust. So you can't invest too much in the people to achieve that. But even if you've got the A-plus team and they're doing an A-plus job, we both know at any one point in time, you could get a government run by people who, for whatever set of reasons, want to change the rules. And you do your best to mitigate that. You're going to be successful, we hope, a large percentage of the time, but not always. And that's part of the business. And so you take it for what it is. The ore bodies are where they are. One of my other favorite things of saying is that, roughly speaking, 50% of the ore bodies are in jurisdictions which are relatively straightforward, and 50% of them are in jurisdictions which are very complex. Very complex. But if you want to be a world leader, you've got to be in both. And you've got to be good at both. And it's hard to be good at both.
In the last 1 minute, I, of course, have to ask one inappropriate question. Otherwise, this would not be my platform.
There you go.
I'm sure Mark must have warned you against it. So you recently ceased to be the executive chairman. Can we announce your retirement, or is it inappropriate? Is that a natural progression?
No.
Talk us through the logic.
Let me ask you a question. What does the term of art executive chairman mean when Mark Bristow is your CEO?
I don't know how two executives, of which Dr. Bristow's one, fit into one room, one airplane or one company. So is this just a natural progression? You've been executive chairman for a long time.
No, frankly, these term of arts, executive chairman, non-executive chairman, this spectrum, to me it's a little bit meaningless. The fact is, when you're working extremely closely with one other person, you divvy up the workload in some intelligent manner. Hopefully you're complementary. Whatever you call yourself. Fonda's saying when Deng Xiaoping was the paramount leader of China, at that point in his life, at the end, His only formal title was he was vice president of the Chinese Business Association. But he was in charge. So the title doesn't really matter.
Ladies and gentlemen, I can but only hope you found this conversation as interesting as I am. I'm a bit of a gold bug. I was young when these big names like Peter Monk and so ran the world. So for me, it was a special privilege to catch up with Barrick, but especially to get to know John Thornton. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you, John. Thank you. Thank you.